Look at the Sicha Chelek Chavzayim, volume 27, Sicha for Behar, Sicha number 1. The Sicha, the Rabbi looks at the laws of Kinyan, of legal acquisition or transference of ownership. In Jewish law, there's a whole section which is talked about explicitly in Parshas Behar in detail. How do you transfer ownership? In Rambam, it's a whole book called the Book of Ownership, Book of Kinyan, transference. If I sell you something or gift you something, etc., transfer ownership. When is that final? And why is it relevant? Because then we cannot change our minds. So let's suppose I made a sale and one of us gets cold feet. When can we say, never mind, I didn't mean to do it? What's that moment? So in Jewish law, there's a moment when the transference takes place, etc., etc. There's a different methodology of doing that formality of ownership, and whether it's if it's a real estate or if it's another movable object, there's different systems. In Judaism, in Torah law, it's not just the transfer, it's a conveyance of money. There's got to be something done, and that's the moment, that's the cutoff. It's sold. And you cannot change your mind unless both parties agree to back out. So transference is a legal reality. It's got to take hold. And the same is true, by the way, with a gift. If I tell you I'm giving you this cup as a gift, nothing happened. But if I give it to you and it's in your hand, it's done. I cannot back out unless you agree to it. If I do, I did a sin. I stole, in a sense. So conveyance is a legal reality. This is a discussion that in halacha and Jewish law, and Rabbi uses Rambam as the text for this, there are 3 interesting laws regarding conveyance. And let's bring them up and discuss them. And then the Rebbe is going to teach us spiritual applications regarding them. So law number 1. One cannot transfer ownership to that which did not yet exist. In Hebrew, the halachic language is ein adam makna davar sheloi bala elav. You cannot transfer ownership to something that doesn't yet exist. What does that mean? Future assets. It's interesting that in America, in the stock market, people invest in futures. It's a whole thing. In halacha, there wouldn't be such a concept of conveyance. If I sell you futures of something that I own, it's wonderful, but either one of us can back out at any time. It's not really sold. Unless, of course, we decide that it is binding. When it comes to monetary law, both parties can agree and make it binding. But let's assume there was no special arrangement made. The blanket law is if I sell you futuristic assets, if I sell you futures, it's not a done deal. It's not transferred. You can back out. I can back out. What would be an example? The examples the Talmud gives is I sell you my field. I could sell you my field. You give money, you do certain things to gain ownership. In the case of real estate, you put up a fence or you do something in the field. But here I didn't sell you my field. I told you I'm selling you the crop, the next crop, the next 2 crops, the next 5 crops. I'm selling you crop. I'm not selling you field. The sale doesn't take hold. And either one of us can back out. That's why I gave the introduction. If we both agree, that's fine. But let's say the crop shows up and one of us decides, you decide you overpaid for the type of crop, or I decide you underpaid, I can say, never mind. And you say, what do you mean you sold it to me? You didn't. The ownership does not transfer. Why? Because you sold me futures. You sold me a non-entity. You sold me the crop that the field will yield. That's a will. It didn't happen yet. So you sold me nothing. If you sell me a field, you sold me something. But if you sell me produce, you sell me actual produce, great. But you're selling me future produce, it doesn't take hold. The other examples is if I'm selling you the fruits of a tree. If I sell you the tree, it's sold. You own the tree and everything that ever comes from it. But if I sell you the fruits of the next season, it's not, there's no kinyan. Doesn't take hold. If I tell you that this sheep, all of the shearings of this sheep for the next year or month or whatever belong to you, I'm selling you the shearings, but they don't exist. It doesn't take hold. I'm selling you an animal. No, I'm selling you the offspring. The offspring of this animal will belong to you. It's not sold because the offspring doesn't exist yet. There's an interesting discussion in Allah if the animal's pregnant. Same thing as if you sell a slave or a maidservant, or you sell the maidservant's offspring. If she's pregnant, I believe the halacha is in a visible way, it already exists. But again, if you're selling futuristic assets, they don't exist, and there's no sale. So that's a general halacha. Number two is, however, you could transfer ownership of a tree for its fruits. That means I could sell you the future assets. You know how? If I sell you the tree for its fruits. If I sell you the tree, you own the tree. So you own the tree, and of course, everything that comes from it. But what if I don't sell you, if I sell you the fruits, you own the fruits. If I sell you the future fruits, there's no sale, as we said. But what if I said to you that I'm selling you the tree for its fruits? I'm not really selling you the tree. I own the tree. But you own the tree in regards to its produce. This is an interesting spin. There could be a lot of different relevance to that. I didn't sell you the tree. So let's say the tree burns down or something happens. I own the wood, etc. I own the real estate around the tree. But I sold you that, instead of saying to you, I'm going to sell you the future produce, I'm telling you that I'm selling you the tree with regard to its produce. And the same thing can be all the four examples and many more examples that you can think of. I'm selling you not the future produce of the field. I'm selling you the field with regard to the future produce. I'm selling you the sheep with regard to its shearings. I'm selling you this animal, but I'm not really selling you the animal. I'm selling the animal with regard to its offspring. But you can't butcher the animal. You don't own it. But you own it for its potential. This is a spin. And that does take hold. If you take a look at the right side of the screen at the bottom, I have the three groupings. And those three groupings spell out what we just said in 1 and 2. There's something called kinyan haguf. I sell you an actual item. I could sell you a field. I can sell you produce. But that's only if it exists. Then on the bottom of the screen, there's something called kinyan pedis. I can sell you the produce. I can sell, let's use the tree as the example. Let's stick with the tree. I can sell you a tree, or I can sell you produce. I cannot sell you future produce, it doesn't exist yet. But then there's a concept in the middle called kinyan haguf lepedoisav. I can sell you the actual item, the tree, with regards to its future fruits. This becomes an interesting legal discussion in and of itself with a lot of different levels of application. But this Sicha is going to take it to the Hasidic side. But I'm just saying, even on the legal side, it's a tremendous amount of interesting discussion. And then number 3, rule 3, which the Sicha is based on, is an interesting exception to rule 1. Rule 1 was, I cannot sell you futures. Rule 2 is that there's an exception to rule 1. I could sell you futures if I sell you the actual item for its futures. So I'm not really selling futures. I'm selling the item's potential, or the item for its potential. But rule number 1 still stands. If I sell you futures, there's no sale. Aha! Rule 3 says that there's a conveyance that exists if for futures, and it takes hold. And what is that? If I made a commitment to do a mitzvah, I made a commitment to make a pledge, not to a private person to sell or gift to them, but rather to the holy temple, or to a charity, or to a poor person, etc. Any transference, any conveyance, which is a mitzvah, says that you have to keep your vows. When you make a mitzvah vow, you have to keep it. If you make a commitment to do a mitzvah, you have to keep it. And therefore, if I commit, I'm giving the temple all the fruits that will come from this tree in the next season. I must do it. But the fruits don't exist. How can you convey something non-existent? You're conveying a non-entity. That's true. So really, there's no transference, there's no kinyan on the fruits because they don't exist. But there is a total obligation on me as a person, And therefore, bottom line is, the deal is done. I have to stick with it. So this is an interesting and fantastic exception to this principle. That's the Rebbe. Okay, these are three principal rules about Kinyan, transference of ownership. Says the Rebbe, let's learn a little Chassidus. Let's apply this in our service of Hashem. And the Rebbe gives a whole introduction by saying that the service of Hashem is very much compared to a Kinyan, to buying, to obtaining, to transferring ownership. The language is, I am created to serve my owner, my buyer. You would expect it to say l'shamish es boidi, to serve my creator. And often people use that translation. I am created to serve my maker. But it's not really the literal, it's not really the translation. Anin evresi l'shamish es koini, points out the Rebbe. I'm created to serve my owner, my buyer. And why? And we find that term also in Oz Yashir, the Song of Moses and the Jewish people. Amzu Kanisa, this nation that you have obtained, that you have bought. We also speak about it when Mashiach comes, that Hashem will come then and gather the nations and liknes sha'arame. Excuse me, he will buy. He will take ownership of his nation. What's this ownership? So I think what the Rebbe is saying here is that that's the mission of a Yid in the world. Of course, God is our creator, and technically, but the idea of ownership represents transference. By free choice, this is not explicit in the Sicha, but this is how I understand this message. To me, it's explicit in the Sicha. By free choice, we're in charge of ourselves. Hashem is my maker, but I do what I want, thank you very much. That's Hashem's design, that I own me. And what is the mission of a Yid? To transfer his ownership to Hashem. Pirkei Avos talks about it a lot. It's brought here in the footnotes and also by the end of the Sicha, that there's 5 things that Hashem took ownership of. One is the Torah, and one is the Jewish people. Amzu Kanisa. And the Rebbe explains in that Mishnah that what's so special? The whole world is Hashem's. He owns everything. So why those 5 things? Because those 5 things represent something that comes from the domain of someone else and is moved into Hashem's ownership. The Jewish people, they're a people. No, we have the ability. Hashem took us. And in Avodah, in our service, it means that we, by choice, can say, no, I'm not in charge. I'm going to be a servant of Hashem. I'm going to belong to Him, which is the whole purpose of the creation. So transference, ownership, kinyan, represents the whole purpose of the Jewish nation and really the whole purpose of creation. To transfer everything into Hashem's domain, to Hashem's ownership. So this becomes, now that we understand that introduction, now we can apply these 3 types of kinyanim, of forms of transference of ownership, to different types of Jews that are in our service of Hashem. So let's start from the top. Kinyan haguf, this is the easiest. I sell you the tree. Let's just stick with the tree as the example. I sell you the tree. All the future fruits that will come this year and next year and in 10 years belong to you because you own the tree. This represents the service of a tzaddik. A tzaddik never sins. A tzaddik is not capable of sinning. Not only that, we know. Not only that, but why is it tzaddik? All his future behaviors will be good. That represents all the fruits that will ever come from him are going to be good. How do we know that? Because he sold his very self to Hashem. What is the definition of a tzaddik as per Tanya? His mind and heart are in the hands of his divine soul. His mind and heart just think godly opinions, and his emotions are completely in love with Hashem and that which is holy. So therefore, his whole person is in the hands of Hashem. That's his identity. So if your identity is your divine soul, your neshama, you're in control of your emotions. Your emotions are just those of the divine soul. So of course all the fruits are going to be good. That's a given. Of course all the behaviors are going to be good. We don't have to even discuss behaviors with a tzaddik. Behaviors. He belongs to Hashem. His identity. Identity means your emotion and your opinions. The seichel and midas, the makeup of the soul, belong to Hashem. That's what a tzaddik is. And therefore, he transfers over himself, and therefore, whatever comes, all the behaviors will automatically be good. It's not even a question. Whereas the Beinani, this gets tricky. The Beinani is somebody who's in between. But to make this easier, let's first start with the non-Beinani. I don't want to say the Russia. It could be a high level functioning Russia of Etovlo in the language of Tanya, which is clearly where most of us fall. He's not a Beinani. He wants to be, he could act like one, but he's not. He still has a struggle and he's still capable of failing. This person, he's not giving over the tree. Not tzaddik, gave over the tree. Translation, his very identity, he just loves Hashem. Tzaddik doesn't have to be told, don't do a sin. It's like you don't have to tell me not to walk in front of a truck or not to put my hand in the fire. I'm not interested. My person, my identity is, I don't want to do that. So you don't have to stop me from doing it. Same thing is, tzaddik doesn't have to be told to do a mitzvah. Say, well, you don't have to tell me to do things that are good for me, that feel good. I don't know, go get some sushi. I don't need a command for that. It works naturally. My identity goes in that direction. The non-Beinani, it's 2 steps lower than the tzaddik. The Rosh of Etovlo, he struggles. He still has both souls functioning, and he's probably more in control of his animal and human soul than of that of his divine soul. So here, you can't say that he transferred ownership of himself to Hashem. What's the self? The self is the emotion. Seichel midas, the mind and heart. What does he love? He loves physicality. What he could control is the actual fruit. Translation, Tanya says that every person, not a tzaddik and not even a Beinani, can control his thought, speech, and action, his behaviors. There's no excuse for that. I could control my behavior in thought and speech and action. In Tanya language, that's not the actual makeup of the soul, which is seichel and midas, the intellect and the emotion, but it's the levushay hanefesh, haneshama, the garments of the soul, the expression of the soul, behaviors. I can control that. Anybody can control that. In the language of Kinyan, it's called Kinyan Pedis. I've transferred ownership to the fruit. I have a fruit, I can sell it to you. I didn't sell you the tree, I sold you the fruit. In this application, it means I'm not sold to Hashem. My heart and my person, my identity is not sold to Hashem. My identity is very much about me and my ego and my pleasures. But I can sell the behavior. I can choose right now to do the right thing. And I can do that the next minute and the next minute constantly. The problem is, though, I can't sell futures. I can only control current behaviors. What's going to happen tomorrow? I don't know. What's going to happen in an hour? I don't know. I can get tested in a tough way and I could fail. There's no guarantees. And the reason is because I'm not really in control of me. I'm just controlling behavior. My identity is still drawn to physicality. And in the halachic language is, I can only sell fruits that I have. I can't sell future. I don't know what's going to be tomorrow. I don't know how tough that test will be. And therefore, the non-Beinani can only be in control of immediate. See, I put the number 1. That line number 1 lines up with this. You can't transfer ownership, which that's what doesn't exist. You can't sell future assets. The non-Beinani controls existing behaviors. I can't decide now what tomorrow's behavior is going to look like. Tomorrow, I'll deal with that battle. I could do it every day, but it's a day by day, one day at a time. So there's a tremendous gap between the tzaddik and the non-Beinani. Whereas the tzaddik has completely transferred his very ownership. He sold the whole tree. His own identity is now about Hashem, his nefesh elokis, his divine soul. So all the fruits, all the behaviors that will ever come will for sure be good. It's not even a question about the fruits. The tree is sold. Whereas the non-Beinani or the Rasha, this tree is not sold at all. He can only sell fruits, behaviors, and therefore it's day by day, minute by minute. Says the Rebbe, there's something in between. And that's called the Beinani. A Beinoni, when people read Tanya without proper study, they think of the Beinoni as somebody who does not control his emotions, he just controls his behaviors and he never loses. But that's not really the definition of a Beinoni. Because that can be the definition of a good Russia. A good Russia could also never lose the battle in terms of his behaviors. The Beinoni does mean that he has some emotional attachment to God. Otherwise, what differentiates him from the Russia? Conversely, if the Beinoni is in love with God, so what differentiates him from the tzaddik, and how does he still have a struggle? So Tanya explains it, the Beinoni loves God at the times of prayer. Not always. But he loves God enough at the time of prayer that there is an impact of that love throughout the whole day, and it will stop him from sin. It's an interesting middle of the road where he's not totally removed from the battle. His identity did not become that of his divine soul. He still has a struggle. But it's not just about behaviors. He does love Hashem. So how do you deal with that? So Tanya says, well, during davening, he's focusing on Hashem and he has such a passion and there's a fire. Imagine you warm up the room, the fireplace warms up the room for a good couple of hours, and then the rest of the day it's nice and warm with the embers. That's a Beinoni. That's tzaddik, the fire is on all the time. But Russia, the fire is never on. He's not in love with Hashem at all. He's loving himself. It's a door-to-door combat with behaviors. The Beinoni, he's got the fire on, let's call it, for the first hour of the day when he davens. And then the rest of the day, the room stays relatively warm based on the love that he had in the time of prayer. Chassidim give an example of, let's say, for example, a person who's very, very busy with a project. You ever notice that you're very busy for a project, you don't have time to eat and you're not hungry? You're busy. I don't know, whatever. It could be a business project. It could be a family project. It could be you're doing a simcha. You're very focused. You can work for 2-3 days and you forgot to eat. Maybe you had a little bite. And it's not like you lost your appetite. It's not like you become a different person. When it's all over, you can say, oh my God, I didn't eat. You're going to be starved. And you still love your favorite food. You didn't lose your appetite. But there's something else that overwhelmed it and that overtook it because you're distracted by something more important to you at the moment. That's what a Beinoni is. That during davening, he's so in love with Hashem. He's still a regular person. Essentially, he's a regular human like the Russia. He still has his animal soul. But at the time of davening, he's so busy, so overwhelmed with love for Hashem that there is no place for anything else. And because he's overwhelmed during davening, it does impact the rest of the day. He's overwhelmed enough the rest of the day that he's not going to sin. You can pretty much guarantee it. But not that it's impossible for him like the tzaddik, but you can guarantee it. The definition of a Beinoni is he never sinned and never will sin, which means his status today is such that he will never sin. How could you know? He's not a tzaddik. He still has a Yetzer Hara. Yeah, he's too busy. He's overwhelmed with the love for Hashem. I don't just mean busy in time. He has this passion for Hashem in davening. He does have a love for Hashem certain times when he's davening, when his godly soul is aroused and awakened. And therefore, it will be so strong that it will impact the whole day. You might say that the difference between the way the tzaddik deals with the animal soul and the Beinoni, the tzaddik wins the battle. There is no more battle. He's developed a love for Hashem, and that's it. Everything else doesn't exist. He loves Hashem, so he's not going to love materialism. It's not possible. The Beinoni doesn't win the battle, he overwhelms the enemy. It's a difference. You can win the battle conclusively, or you can overwhelm the enemy. The enemy says, I'm afraid to fight. And that's one of the ways in that it's discussed, the difference between these two. And therefore, let's apply the beautiful analogy that the Rebbe is learning from Rambam, from this halacha. That while the tzaddik sells the whole tree and therefore automatically the fruits, translation, his whole identity is just his neshama, and therefore, of course, his behaviors will be good. It's not a question. Because he is emotions, love Hashem. The Beinoni has sold the tree with regard to the emotion, with regard to the fruits. The Beini is that second category. Kinyan guf lepeirosav. I didn't sell you the tree, but I didn't just sell you the fruits, in which case I can't sell futures. I've sold you the tree for the fruits. This was example number 2. This was the halacha number 2 on top. That you could transfer, this is the most creative halacha that we're discussing, that you could in fact transfer futures if you transfer the ownership of the item for its futures. And that's what the tzaddik does. Think about the type of Abbas Hashem. When you love Hashem, that means you transfer the tree. Your identity is what you love, where your emotions lie, where your heart lies. That's where you are. In the case of the Beinani, he loves Hashem just enough so that his behavior will be in the right direction. So in the halachic language, will mean he sold the tree with regard to its fruits. Or he sold the sheep with regard to its shearings. He sold the item, guf lepeirosav. He sold the item only with regard to its future results. He didn't sell the actual item. But he didn't just sell the futures because that's non-existent. You can't sell it. He sold the current fruit, actual item for its futures. And that's what a Beinani is. And that's what differentiates him from the Rasha, that you can pretty much make a statement that, of course, he can probably sin if he really, really wants to, but because he still ultimately has a Yetzer Hara. But in his station today, you can say that he's a person who doesn't sin and he will never sin. How could you say that? With regard to the Rasha, we said you can't say that because you can only sell fruits that you have. You can only sell behaviors that are at hand. I don't know how my mood tomorrow will be and whether or not I'll fail. I got to deal with it tomorrow. Every day it's a new struggle. With regard to the Beinani, we say that yes, he does give away his identity to Hashem. Proof is that there's times when he's in love with Hashem. That means he's like a tzaddik during davening. But it only lasts enough for the embers to keep him away from sin. He overwhelms the animal soul and the Yetzer Hara and the drive just for personal pleasure. And therefore, that means he gave himself. He sold the tree just for its produce. He has a love for Hashem. The language of Tanya is brought in the footnotes. A love for Hashem. A love for Hashem enough to trigger that the behavior should be okay. Not necessarily more than that. And there are many levels of Beinani. The Sicha talks about a few of them. But this is the general concept. He loves Hashem, but enough love for the behavior. And that becomes halacha number 2. The Rebbe uses another example and terminology in the Sicha that the tzaddik uses, described sometimes as an eved, whereas the Beinani we could call a shliach. This is interesting to us because the Rebbe used the term shliach. He made shluchim. The Frierdiker Rebbe made shluchim. The Rebbe continued it. The Rebbe said we're all shluchim. It's an interesting term. And what's the difference? An eved is a tzaddik, because an eved means you're owned by the master. You're the ownership of the master. Forever. It's just, you belong to him. A real eved. And that's what the tzaddik is, the tree. His mind, heart, it's not capable of anything else except its interest of the divine soul. That became his identity. The non-Beinani is not sold at all. As we said, only his behaviors. But the Beinani, in a sense, he is sold because he does have moments, strong moments of love for Hashem where he says, of course, I don't want anything else. It's what he loves. It becomes his identity, but only enough to control behavior. So how do you slice that? So in halacha, you might call it a shliach. Think about a shliach. A shliach means a person who is independent person, but his behavior belongs to someone else. A slave, eved, belongs to his master. He doesn't belong to himself. He literally belongs to his master. He doesn't have a separate identity. That's what a tzaddik would be in a sense, ultimately. He's not capable of wanting anything else. A shliach is a separate person. However, he's agreed to do a mission for you. And now he becomes your extension. So much so that his action is not his, it's like yours. You can send a shliach to marry a woman for you, or divorce a woman for you. And the moment when he gives her the ring and the kedushin on your behalf, he can be in another country. You are married to that woman. And the same thing is with divorce. He can be in another country and he gives a divorce to her. You in the other country are divorced from that woman, and she and you can go on and marry. That means he becomes like you. But on the other hand, he's not. Why is he you? How could he marry the woman and you become married? He's not you. Is he your slave? A slave has the halacha of your hand, of your extended hand. Just like your property is like your extended hand. A shliach is an independent person. Aha, it's true. But once he's taken on the mission, he is an extension of you, only with regard to the mission. If the shliach goes and does other things, it has, has nothing to do with his sender. He's only your extension in regard to the mission, so much so that Allah says that if the shliach deviates from the mission is nullified. I told you to buy a field, but you bought the other field. I told you to buy apples, you bought oranges. You didn't buy it from me. You're not my shliach, because a shliach is not a slave who whatever he does automatically represents the master. He's a separate person. He's an extension, though, of the master with relation to the mission. And therefore, if he changes the mission, there's no more mission. In the context of this discussion here, that's what a Beinoni is. He doesn't belong to Hashem completely. He has his own wishes. He's still a human being. He has an animal soul. He has his ego. He has his passions. But he made a decision, and the decision is not just a decision in behavior. He has transformed himself that he has real love for Hashem, and sometimes, and love enough to control behavior. That's exactly what a shliach is. I belong to the other person with regard to the mission. The Beinoni is like a tzaddik with regard that he will never violate. But he's not like a tzaddik on the inside for real. Doesn't have that kind of love where his whole identity is Hashem. No, that would be a slave. The Rebbe says, and this I think is the most important part of the Sicha because it relates to people on our level, that the non-Beinoni. Remember we said rule number 3 on the top of the screen, that when it comes to pledges to tzedakah, which are a mitzvah, you could make a commitment for something that's futuristic and it takes hold. As we explained, because it's a mitzvah, you have an obligation. That's an exception to rule number 1. Rule number 1 said you can't transfer futures. That's true. That's if you're just making a business deal or whatever, or giving a gift. But if it's a tzedakah aspect, you're giving it to, made a commitment to the shul or to the temple or to a poor person, any mitzvah obligation, it takes hold. I commit to give to poor people the future produce of the tree, or a future yield, or 10% of what I earn next year. It's a commitment I must keep. But why? It's futuristic. And you can't convey ownership, transfer ownership to that which doesn't exist yet. That's true. But when it comes to a mitzvah, there's an obligation on a person. He must fulfill the mitzvah commitments that he makes. And therefore it takes hold. Says the Rebbe, what does this mean in the spiritual sense? This is fantastic. That the non-Beinoni, you and I, the normal people, whose identity is not given over to Hashem, not even a little bit. Not even for the sake of its behaviors, as we discussed by the Beinoni. No. Who am I? I'm me. My pleasures, my desires. I want to live a good life. And therefore, it's very hard to know what my behavior will be tomorrow or even the next minute. I transfer my behaviors to God minute by minute. I can fail in a second. It's a hard life. However, that's when it comes to my decisions about my human behaviors, my regular day-to-day behaviors. Should I overindulge or should I not? Over there, I'm not sold at all. My identity is my desire for physical pleasures, and every time I have to say no or control it or tame it down. I'm not sold at all. However, when it comes to mitzvah matters, if I make a resolution that I'm going to start doing a certain mitzvah, over here, yes, I can convey it. That's rule that lines up with rule number 3. I can make a commitment, and I could hope. In that sense, I'm like a Beinoni. I can make a commitment that I can almost bank on that I'll keep it. Why? How can you say that? But we're talking about a Rasha V'Tovlo, a non-Bainani. How can he make such a commitment? There's no part of him that's totally sold to Hashem. The answer is that when it comes to mitzvahs, there's something else that comes into play. This is the identity. This is coming from the neshama. When I'm struggling with material things and what should be my value system, should it be about materialism or not, my true identity is my animal soul. By a non-Bainani. My animal soul is my whole identity, really. And therefore, it's a constant struggle. But when it comes to mitzvah, I also have a neshama. And when I make a commitment, I'm going to put on tefillin, I'm going to learn Torah, I don't know, I'm going to do the Rambam, I'm going to take on a mitzvah thing. I have a neshama that was given that commandment by Hashem, and that's a true identity. It's a mistake to think that a Rasha doesn't have a neshama. It's a real part of it. The only thing is that the animal soul reigns supreme when it comes to his day-to-day decisions. Because on a human level, he identifies more as a human, as an animal soul than a godly soul. But that doesn't stand in conflict of him doing mitzvahs. And if in vis-a-vis mitzvahs, they're commanded by God to whom? To his neshama. His neshama is a real part of it. And there is no reason why he shouldn't do the mitzvah. When it comes to physical stuff, this pushback from the animal soul. You want me not to overindulge. You want me not to do X, Y, and Z. But I do want to do it. So it's a problem. You're fighting with the real I. But when you tell me to do a mitzvah, not to take away from something from my physical, materialistic pleasures, but to add a mitzvah, that's not in conflict with me. There's another identity, my neshama. I want to do it. Take a look we go over to totally secular Jews who are non-observant, who are living lives of full indulgence, and we say, would you like to put on tefillin? They say, of course. And they like it. And they didn't become about tshuva that second. Why they do that? In this context, it's because this is not in conflict, in a sense. This is my true identity when it comes to my physical behaviors. When it comes to mitzvahs, of course, I know I have a soul and I want to do mitzvahs. And God commanded my soul to do mitzvahs. And by a commandment, I get empowered. It's still a struggle because I still have an animal soul that's still in charge of he still reigns supreme by us, by most people. And therefore, at times it's going to be in conflict. But conceptually, though, this commitment can be a commitment for future, and this is a way for a Bainani to really have some staying power. Because there's a real I, a real place within us that identifies with Hashem, and that is about doing mitzvahs. Just like there's a real I that identifies with our physical stuff regarding our physical human behaviors. And therefore, we are capable in some level of really making a commitment that, please God, holds. I think that the Sicha is huge, and the Rebbe is giving us a very important lesson. Number one is the last point that we made. The Rebbe made a tremendous emphasis. The Rebbe made a tremendous emphasis on positivity, on positive action. The Rebbe spoke much more about telling people to do a mitzvah than not doing a sin. This is not only true in the Mivtzayim, the 10 campaigns that the Rebbe made. It's all about do another mitzvah, do another mitzvah. It's about light the Shabbos candle. It's not about don't be mechalel Shabbos, even though that's very important. But the campaigns that the Rebbe put is more about doing, and also among Hasidim themselves, people will tell the Rebbe that they did a sin. The Rebbe's approach was always just keep doing more mitzvahs. People would go into a private audience and ask the Rebbe for a tikkun, how to rectify a sin, including yeshiva boys who would complain about certain sins that they wanted to rectify. And very often the rectification, most often, was something positive. Study Torah, do mitzvahs with other people. But had you rectified a sin? Why is the Rebbe so a tunnel vision on just action? Keep moving. In the context of the Sicha, it's very, very clear. If you tell people like us who are non-Bainanis to keep fighting the darkness, you're never going to win. That's who we are. We never sold the tree. However, so every day it's constant. But however, when it comes to positive, when you tell me to do a mitzvah, do mitzvahim, and etc., and learn Torah, the neshama is able to make that commitment. That was as point number 3. Pledges that are made to mitzvahs take hold, and therefore it works. We see this in our communities ourselves. Certainly we see it with non-frum, as explained before. But in our own communities itself, we have people who struggle with the Yetzer Hara. Most of us struggle with the Yetzer Hara. People who struggle a lot with the Yetzer Hara, even, let's say, young people who are really struggling. You might say they're drowning with the Yetzer Hara. And then you see them busy with Mivtzayim. They go out there, they'll wrap tefillin on 100 people. There's a rally in Washington, they'll get on a bus and they'll go there and they'll spend the whole day from morning to night wrapping tefillin. What happened? The same person is capable of drowning with the Yetzer Hara. That's just, one has nothing to do with the other. The Yetzer Hara wants what he wants, and he's a tough one. He owns me when it comes to my humanity. But my comes to my mitzvahs, my neshama owns me. It's still a struggle. The Sicha deals with that. But conceptually, it's not in conflict. The neshama wants a mitzvah, give him a mitzvah. Because it's really me. There's a real part of me that wants to do mitzvahs, namely my neshama. And I think the Rebbe's model for our generation is that if you're so busy doing mitzvahs, you have no time for the sins. Just like the Beinani. He doesn't win the battle, but he overwhelms the battle. That's almost the exact language of Tanya. He doesn't win the animal soul, but he overwhelms it, as we said earlier, because he's too busy. And our level, the Rebbe say, you're too busy. Just you're busy more. With Tzayim, there's no time. You're learning, you got to do Rambam, you got to do this, you got to do that. You have another shir, you have another Kriyas Itim. The Rebbe would constantly, almost every Farbrengen, tell us that we have to do a resolution. And often the resolution was, to add more daily study sessions. There was once a yeshiva boy, a Hasidic Behar, who every time the Rebbe said it by Farbrengen, he added 5 minutes. Eventually, he ran out of time. And he had a private yechidus with the Rebbe, this is back in the day, and he wrote to the Rebbe in his note that he does that. The Rebbe said to add, so he adds 5 minutes each time. He has no more time in a day. The story goes that the Rebbe started to laugh. The Rebbe got a kick out of it, that he took it so literally. It's a beautiful thing that he took it so literally. And the Rebbe said that you can add qualitatively. I humbly believe that part of the Rebbe's purpose in constantly pushing that, it was such a constant push. Add more, because the only way we get confused and messed up because we have time on our hands. But if we're busy, we have no time. Akin to the Beinani, who's in love with Hashem, and therefore he has no room in his soul for sin, even though technically he does, but he's overwhelmed with that. The Rasha, us, we can act like the Beinani, just like in the Sicha is telling us. I can't sell the tree, I'm not a tzaddik. I can't even sell the tree for its behaviors, I'm not a Beinani. Which means I don't have a love enough for Hashem that will control my behaviors. I don't have much of a love for Hashem. I love my sushi and my physicality. But I am capable of having a commitment to mitzvahs. I have a neshama, I'm a Jew. And if I'm busy with that, I have no time for something else. And that's perhaps, in my opinion, not such a humble opinion, the Rebbe's mission for our generation. You're just so busy learning Torah, doing mitzvahs more, you're involved, you have goals you need to accomplish, whether it's mivtzayim, whether it's mitzvahs, whether it's tzedakah, whether it's limud Torah, and therefore you are, the way the Sicha concludes, you're so busy you have no time for it. And those commitments will hold because you were given that commandment to your neshama, which is a real part of you. There's a voice note that came around recently in the WhatsApps. And that whatever I'm saying now is reflected right here in this piece. There's a voice note that went around that somebody taped a piece, I think it was from a Yechidus. And apparently you hear the back and forth. Maybe it's a Yechidus, maybe it happened, a quick exchange by dollars. I don't know. I think it's from a Yechidus. And he asked the Rebbe to help him how to take control of himself. I don't know the exact language. We all know, take control of little me. It becomes confusing and overwhelming. And the Rebbe straightforwardly tells him, I'm sorry that I'm not remembering the exact language. You should learn a lot of chassidus. And the Rebbe said, mitten Tag, mitten Nacht, something like that, in the middle of the day, middle of the night, whenever you have a chance, whenever you have an opportunity, just grab it. Just be busy learning a lot of chassidus. I think the Rebbe is reflecting that thing. The guy was asking to find a way to self-control. He would say, well, let's analyze it. Your Yetzer Hara, he's telling you to do wrong things. You can find reasons not to listen to him. It's not good for you in this world, the next world. Stop. Just be busy. Learn Asach Chassidus, which is the light. And the truth, when you learn Chassidus, you know that there's truly a God, and you believe it because there's a part of you that identifies, namely your godly soul. And you're so busy, you have free time, you grab the book, you're learning another Perek Tanya, another Maimer, and therefore there's no time, and and ultimately becomes no space in you for negativity. So this, I think, is lesson one for us non-Bainanis. You're busy with mitzvahs and make achlatas and add to your Torah study. You can almost live like a Bainani. The Rebbe is setting us up. The Rebbe took a whole generation of very simple people, base level people. People are not big Talmud Chachams and Nigla or Chassidus, and set them on shlichus. And their whole life is about getting another yid to do a mitzvah. He saved the generation with that because he spoke to the neshama and he said, what do you mean? You got to take care of Yiddishkeit. You got to do something. You got to help another yid. The fact that you like your physicality, that's nice. You got to help another yid. And by the time you keep helping a yid over and over and over again, you have no time for the obsession with physicality so much. And this, I think, extends to the shliach part of the Sicha. This is my second lesson that I'm taking. It's really an extension of it. That even though in the Sicha, nominally the shliach is the level of the Beinani, because technically a shliach, like the Beinani, is in fact an extension of the sender, of Hashem, like the Beinani, because he's committed, like the Beinani, with regard to the action, where most of us not. But at the same time, the Rebbe made us shluchim. He made designated shluchim, and he said that every yid is a shaliach. Why did he use that language? He could have either said every yid is a servant of Hashem, an eved, but it's not true. We're not a tzaddik. Or it could say every yid is, I don't know, he's trying. He calls him a shliach. That means, because I think that these two lessons are connected, being that when it comes to mitzvah matters, I could make a real commitment, a commitment that you can bank on to some degree, as explained earlier, because in mitzvah matters, my godly soul is my real identity, and therefore it's the real me. So on that level, if I'm busy and I have no time for anything else, I become a shliach. I'm not an eved. You can't say I lost my identity. You can't say I don't enjoy a good vacation or a good barbecue. But on the other hand, I was given a mission. And therefore, I become my sender's extension, be it the Rebbe, be it Hashem. I become like I'm sold to the master with regard to practicality, certainly with regard to my mitzvahs. And if I'm busy enough with that, then basically that becomes my life. Sicha is very important in terms of practical terms.